Hello, everybody. My name is Dr. Maurice Stinnett, and I serve as one of the directors of the Warner Music Group Blavatnik Family Foundation Social Justice Fund. And I also happen to serve as the global head of equity, diversity, and inclusion at Warner Music Group. Family, I want to welcome everyone to our second installment of Conversations on Change. Now, if you happen to miss our first event in this series, when I spoke to representatives from the Florida Rights Restoration Coalition, the Black Cultural Archives, Black Futures Lab, the Rhythm and Blues Foundation, and Howard University, you can check it out anytime by clicking on the link in the description of this video. Now, some of you know, the Social Justice Fund was established in June of 2020 as communities were devastated by the killings of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, and countless other Black people. And we have been driven by those heartbreaking and infuriating events to focus the fund's resources on causes dedicated to promoting social justice through education, arts and culture, and criminal justice reform. Now, before I get into today's discussion, I want to thank our partners, One United Bank, More Impact, and Michelle Richburg's Mar Group, for coming along with us on this journey. You have been phenomenal. I also want to thank my amazing colleagues on the advisory board. This past year has been incredibly educational and impactful for all of us. And we have strived to create a strategy that will result in lasting change in our communities. And on the last note, I want to thank our second tranche of grantee partners who have done remarkable work on the front lines for the fight of equity, opportunity, social justice, and anti-racism. Thank you, family, for getting the job done. So without further ado, I want to hand it over to our moderator, who will introduce our representatives from each one of these amazing organizations so you can learn more about them. So please help me welcome my sister, my friend, fierce advocate, political strategist, fellow director on the Social Justice Fund, and also she's a boss, the Chief Impact Officer and founder of 1063 West Broad, the one and only, my friend and sister, Miss Alencia Johnson.
Thank you so much, Maurice, and hello to our esteemed panelists, as well as everyone watching. I'm truly honored to be moderating this discussion. And so let me introduce you to our wonderful panelists today. First up, we have Dr. Uzodinma Iweala, CEO of the Africa Center. We also have Asali DeVan, Ecclesiastes, CEO of the Ashé Cultural Arts Center. Next up, we have Robert Rooks, CEO of Reform Alliance. And last, but certainly not least, we have Tina Brown, the CEO of Overtown Youth Center. Thank you so much for being here, everyone. And so we'll just jump into the conversation. Could each of you please tell me a little bit more about your organization and some of your goals for the upcoming year? Uzo, we'd love to start with you.
Sure. Thank you very much for having me, and it's good to see everybody's faces here. I'll tell you a little bit about the Africa Center. So we're a multidisciplinary institution that was born out of the Museum for African Art, which from its name was focused on predominantly African art. And then a few years ago, the idea came up to expand the focus of the institution so that we looked at more than just art, but really how do you tell the story or transform narratives of the continent of Africa and its diaspora through arts, culture, as a whole, but then also through looking at business and policy, with the idea that you can't help or hope to tell the Africa story if you don't talk about how art and culture impacts the political space and how that impacts the economic space. So it's really understanding all of those things together that gives you a sense of where Africa is and where its diaspora is and where we're trying to go as well. And really, we're about centering Africans in the future of the continent and also the future of the world. We're really about the story of Africa is a global story. It's a story that impacts us all. And it's a story that is transformative, not just for us, but for everyone when you really get down and dirty and understand it. And that's what we do every day at the Africa Center, whether we're doing it through physical programming, inviting people to our space in New York on Fifth Avenue, just across from Central Park, or if we're doing digital programs that are really about the history, the politics, the culture of the continent. And it's I feel very lucky to have the job that I have and to be able to do this, to tell these stories, new stories, to help people reframe their thinking about old stories, on a daily basis.
Amazing. Thank you so much. Asali, would love to hear more about the Ashé Cultural Center.
Thank you so much. I'm so excited to be able to tell you about Ashé, especially on the heels of Dr. Iweala and the amazing work that he does to change narratives in the African diaspora. And so our work is really about implementing those narratives in a way that helps community to achieve real impacts. We are looking to use art and culture to build wealth, to change life outcomes. In New Orleans, our not just our artists, but our Black community in general has a 25-year difference in life expectancy. And we think that by centering the people, places, and philosophies of the African diaspora in our everyday work, in our relationships with artists, in our relationships with residents, that we can make real life changes in not only their environment, but in the ecosystem that guides industry and economic systems here in our city.
Amazing, amazing. We love that. Robert, would love to hear about Reform Alliance. And congratulations. I know you were kind of new to this role.
No, I am. And Alicia, thank you so much for creating space for this conversation. And it's an honor to be on with the other panelists. Looking forward to the discussion and what we come up with as real solutions we should be doing moving forward. Reform Alliance is a unique organization. I've been in all of 3 months. Some of the top sports, business, and entertainment influencers in the world joined together to create this organization in hopes to stop mass incarceration. We focus on the specific part of probation and parole and the role it plays in mass incarceration. It is our belief that probation and parole systems are a big part of racialized and ineffective American justice system. More than 4.5 million people are on probation and parole, mostly poor people and disproportionately Black and brown. In fact, every 4 minutes, someone is sent to prison for a technical violation, not a new crime, but for breaking a rule or a stipulation, costing taxpayers $2.8 billion. Just this week, June 26, a grandmother, 76 years old, was sent back to prison because she decided to take a word processing course in downtown Baltimore, and her ankle monitor alerted that she was not where she was supposed to be. So she's now waiting in the jail on her way back to federal prison. It's extraordinary when you think about that. And then you think about the scale, the upwards of 20 to 25% of the prison population in any state and federally, folks are in for probation violation. So we at Reform are working to change that. We want to transform probation and parole by changing laws, systems, and culture. Instead of the current system, which is full of trap wires that result in people going back to prison, we want to create real pathways to work and well-being. Just to end this part, Reform was founded in 2019 out of the story of recording artist Meek Mill. Meek was trapped in the probation system for over a decade and was sentenced to 2 to 4 years for popping a wheelie on a motorbike. And so the outrage regarding the Meek situation is how Reform was founded. And so we'll continue as an organization to work at the state and federal level to change laws, change systems. And it's our hope to build a coalition around solutions. What can we be doing instead of what's happening now? So I'm excited about engaging in that, both in this dialogue, but also across the country.
It's powerful, powerful stuff. Tina, would love to hear about Overtown Youth Center.
Hi. Good afternoon. Thank you for having me. The Overtown Youth Center is a youth development organization located in Miami, Florida. And our goal is really to bridge educational, social, emotional, health, and opportunity gaps for young people ages 5 up until the age of 25. In recent years, Overtown Youth Center has really become a community resource center. And our primary goal is to bridge these gaps to mitigate poverty, generational cycles of poverty in our community. Our services are very holistic in the fact that the Overtown Youth Center provides in-school services, after-school services, summer employment services, summer camp, as well as providing family support services for families and individuals of all ages. That's pretty much our work. And our goal really is in the upcoming year is to deepen our impact in our community and really focus on mental health, behavioral health, and civic engagement, especially in the spaces that we're in currently.
Thank you for that incredible work. And it sounds from all of what you are talking about, a recurring theme and a through line is the education piece of this. And so how does, and this is specifically for you, Tina, how does education from a young age ultimately create a pathway for more diversity, for more equity, inclusion, and justice in businesses and boardrooms and broadly in society?
So I think for us, I mean, we've seen in our community, we provide services in the urban community where the educational gaps are large. We see a lot of our students preschool fall behind in communities, and we feel like bridging those educational gaps gives our students a competitive edge to enter into spaces where they wouldn't otherwise. Our program provides an opportunity for students for us to understand the deficiencies of our students, to address those deficiencies, to ensure that students graduate from high school, and also our program provides an opportunity for us to help students actually get to colleges or universities or vocational programs, which ultimately gives them a space in rooms that they wouldn't otherwise have. Education is the key. It is the pathway to success and to enter into many different spaces. And we believe that education is the foundation for growth, development, and success in our communities. We are right now operating in a community that is being gentrified, and we know that education is going to be the key to prepare our students to enter into new spaces, new job opportunities, so that we can eliminate and break down those barriers to entering into workplaces and to really minimize the equity divide.
That early education is so incredibly important. We also know the saying, though, you can't know where you're going if you don't know where you've come from. And so Uzo and Asali, I'd love to hear from you both specifically about education, about the diaspora, right? And how that education helps promote social justice and more equitable futures.
Sure. I mean, I can jump in here and start from the perspective of the Africa Center, and really in two ways. One, we have a very rich history as a continent, which, I think in many, many ways, it's known to some, it's not known to as many as I think it needs to be for the continent and the diaspora to achieve the heights that we want as a group of people. It's very difficult, I think, when you start talking about African history or Africa's history and educating people about that, because we've got such a vast continent. We've got 54 countries, but before that, I mean, you're talking about thousands of different ethnic groups. You're talking about many people with different languages. You're talking about many histories, cultures, and it all gets put into this umbrella of Africa and African history. And so that's actually one of the first points that we want to educate people about, is that we are a rich and diverse continent and a rich and diverse diaspora with many different approaches to living and life and how we are. And so I think that's the first thing, is getting people interested in that, interested in the connection between the continent and the various places of the diaspora, whether you're talking about in South America, here in the United States, in Europe, even in East Asia, talking about those connections and how those connections really show the rich life of Africa and Africans around the world. And then, of course, it's getting people to who are not part of the diaspora, who or maybe don't identify with the diaspora or with the continent, to also come on this journey with us and to say and to see, to hear, to listen to who we are, to the stories that we tell about ourselves. And so that's something that I think is really, really important just from an educational perspective, not just for Africans to know where we're coming from and where we're going, but for the world to understand, again, through the African lens, where we have come from and where we're going. As they say, everybody is from Africa. We all came out of the continent and then dispersed. So, if you're looking for history, you know where to find it.
Absolutely. And when you're looking for history to inform your future, as your question implies, this notion of Sankofa, of knowing where you're coming from and in order to be able to deal with the challenges and to build solutions that directly apply to your current situation. So here at Ashé, we have several programs that focus on education and providing an African-centered education to one youth. So we have our Kuumba Academy, which is a summer and weekend program that gives youth ages 6 to 16 all kinds of opportunities to explore not just how the African diaspora is expressed and realized here in New Orleans, but globally, and how we're all connected. We have INCUE, the Institute for Cultural Education, which years ago we called ICE. Naturally, we had to change that moniker, but include teachers. So we work with Head Start teachers, elementary and high school teachers, to give them a toolkit, a culturally competent way of dealing with their students and sharing with them and expressing all of their subject matter through the lens of African-centered philosophies. And then we also have a project with the Alliance for Cultural Equity, which is a collaborative of cultural institutions, of marginalized cultural institutions here in New Orleans that are working to change the curriculum of the entire state as relates to how African folks and our experiences and our community-based solutions are centered inside of our state's education system.
Well, I'm learning so much already just listening to the both of you. And along those lines, Robert, I'd love for you to talk about why it's so important for us to understand the history of systemic racism, particularly as we are trying to disrupt those systems.
No, absolutely. And I just want to start by just sharing my experience. I learned about systemic racism by living through it. When I was growing up in Dallas, Texas in the 80s and 90s, I experienced my community get decimated right before my eyes. A working class community, Black folk. We had someone to work on the cars across the street. We had a butcher, social worker. My dad was a pastor. Just working class folks, and then crack cocaine hit the neighborhood in the 80s. And then what followed crack cocaine was not real help. It was tough on crime. So my community, others like it around the country, were calling out for help, trying to find real solutions, but basically got a one-size-fits-all response, and that was incarceration. And so drug laws and tougher crime were basically the United States' response to this issue, and we have been building on that response for the last several decades. And now what we have are systems of bureaucracy that don't respond to real issues, but basically feed on itself. And racial disparities come through those systems. And so standing today, we have 6.3 million people caught up in the justice system. 40% of them are Black, and these systems are what carries the legacy of Jim Crow, and we have to be clear about that if we want to undo it and we create something in this place. And from the Reform Alliance perspective, we're super clear that our role is probation and parole. but it's only one part of the overall story. And in our part, how can we undo how systems engage and interact with people's lives, and undo how systems manage failure, and replace it with the facilitation of real help. The truth of the matter is, from my perspective, people solve problems, not bureaucracies, right? And so the way we address real issues in our community is to connect people to people. And the more we can do that, the more we can find our way both out of mass incarceration, but addressing root causes of very real issues that we're dealing with in our communities.
Yeah, I agree. Very, very real issues, and we have to connect people. People closest to the pain are the ones with the solution. So thank you for that. And so along those lines that you all have talked about in your opening is the role of arts and culture along this work that you all are doing. So I'd love to hear from, maybe Robert, Uzo, and Tina. How can art and culture be a part of this educational journey? And how can exposing people to different kinds of art and histories help to shape the narrative and then eventually the results towards social justice and anti-racism?
So Alencia, there's an old saying that culture eats policy for breakfast. And as someone that's been doing criminal justice policy work for 23 years now, that saying is right on. I'm actually excited about the moment we're in terms of the opportunities for real change, not because of the policy work, but because we're now in the moment where the issues that we're talking about today, the solutions that have been raised, are starting to seep into the culture. And we need to continue to build on that, to engage cultural influencers, to continue to organize, hit the streets, continue to communicate with each other, because that's how we're going to ensure that our solutions are not just solutions for today, but solutions for the next generation. Culture is not just about where you are right now. Culture is also about where you're headed. And artists gives us a language to communicate with each other. They spark new ideas, they have insights, they have conversations. And so artists and influence are key to help to shape that culture. So I'm excited about this moment. It's a moment that many of us have been working towards for a really long time. We just want to make sure we get the most out of it for our kids and our kids' kids.
That's great. Uzo, what do you say to this?
Yeah, I mean, I love that statement that Robert made, culture eats policy for breakfast. And I think that we see it. Why is it that we're so engaged in the reboot of the culture wars? That's because, all these people who are seeking power or who want to consolidate power recognize just how important it is to control cultural output and cultural expression and the way society shapes itself or considers itself. It's why we're fighting, or I should say why they are fighting, this idea of critical race theory, which none of them can explain or understand. It's why they bring up all these. It's why things like abortion are front and center, because these are all about cultural practices or cultural identities and ideas. And so when you start looking at the role of culture, the importance of culture and art, who creates culture? It is the artists, it is the writers, it is those people who hold our stories, who actually lay down the narratives. And I think it's really important that we recognize that connection, how strong that connection is. And, in some ways, how we need to, I wouldn't say privilege, but bring culture as an entity back into the discussion and not shy away from it. I think oftentimes people say, politics is like a hard field and culture is a soft field. And that's just not the case. I think Robert said it, and I think you see it again. The fact that Meek Mill is involved in, with his prominence, with his talents, is involved in criminal justice reform. That's really important. That's culture driving and pushing political change or policy change. We see it again with the continent and in some of the African continent and some of the things that we talk about. One of the most important things is, of course, getting a new narrative out there about the continent of Africa, about the countries there, about our people. What has been really effective, as silly as it is, Black Panther as a cultural phenomenon helped to reshape the way that people think about the continent of Africa. And there's so many other people doing exactly that, whether you're talking about writers like Chimamanda Adichie, or I would say one of the most important political activists, Chinua Achebe, who we wouldn't necessarily call an activist, he's a writer. But Things Fall Apart is one of the best-selling books in the entire world. And that helped to reshape the way that people thought about colonialism within the continent, decenter whiteness and recenter Africanness in that discussion. That is an important policy shift born out of cultural, artistic, literary production. It's so important.
Tina, what do you say to this question?
You're on mute.
I'm sorry. For me, I think that art plays a critical role in our work. You know, our students have had the opportunity to be extremely creative, really expressing themselves as it relates to certain issues. Last year, we launched this Vote the Future campaign, and we used art as a way to inform our community of the importance of voting. A lot of our community members jumped on that bandwagon, young people, old people. Our students were able to create artwork and really spark their interest in entrepreneurship. But I think that art plays a critical role in just our students, our community expressing themselves, expressing those issues that they want bubbled up. As art plays a role in helping them to advocate for themselves in issues that affect our community. So art really plays a critical role in our community. And I've just seen I've personally been seeing the growing trend in art and artists really getting out there and having a voice for themselves.
All of you are speaking my language of using culture to really shift policy, and that's the long-term strategy. And so I am loving this conversation. And Asali, I want to ask you specifically, and something that's very timely, can you talk a little bit about how you utilize the arts and culture, the arts in your space at Ashé to really help the community heal during our current COVID-19 pandemic, especially in somewhere like in New Orleans that has been so devastated by the pandemic, particularly the Black folks in the community?
So I appreciate you calling it our current pandemic, right? Because so many of us are seem to have forgotten that we are actually still in the throes, of this emergency of humanity, right? That people are still dying and getting sick and experiencing all kind of economic and social and health impacts. The first thing that we noticed after the pandemic was that the people that we serve, artists and culture bearers, were being left out of not only the discussions, around relief, but just any traditional routes to relief were being denied to them because they didn't have traditional routes to employment. So in the time when everything was shut down and, people were finding their income, being cut off and impacted, the little help that people did have access to were being denied to artists and culture bearers. So we formed a partnership, with some like equity-minded folks who we do great work with here, including Junebug Productions and Antenna Gallery, to create what we call the Creative Response Network. And we shifted some of the funding that we had for the commission of artwork to provide direct relief to artists during that time. And through that partnership, we were able to attract some more funding and eventually wound up distributing around $850,000 to artists in our community who did not have any other way of getting support immediately after COVID, when all of their shows were being canceled and the lucrative festival season here in New Orleans was eliminated and, just their whole way of being decimated. So that's one of the first things that we did. And that collaborative is still going strong and actually, attracting some national attention in terms of providing infrastructure support to artists and culture bearers here in New Orleans, which is, really a global heritage treasure, the traditions and heritage that our folks keep alive. The second thing that we did was to transfer our programming from, in person and touching and hugging and loving, to figure how do we touch and love and heal, during COVID at this time, when folks are isolated in all of the most essential ways. And so, really, look to figure out how to use our programming in our space. So even though we were not open, we transformed our windows into exhibits for the whole communities, even though folks couldn't come inside anymore. And in our digital programming, we were still able to bring Carnival 2021 to people in a real way, and Indians got to still wear their suits, and musicians got to share their songs, with their communities, even though they couldn't touch and be with them. And that was true of a lot of the program. And even our kids' summer camp was digital, which, was an amazingly interesting challenge. And then also the other thing that we did that we're super proud of is a project called Community Spread, where we have given full-time employment to 7 artists to train them as community health workers, because we learn in our work that artists are much more trusted messengers in community than health care providers. Unfortunately, we have a lack of trust between community members and doctors. And so we formed a partnership with artists, the New Orleans East Hospital, which is under great Black woman leadership as well, one of only 4 Black women CEOs of a hospital in the country, to come up with a project that will create equity toolkits for healthcare providers that can be shared nationally based on the data collected from our community health workers who are working with community to address population level indicators, right? Nobody wants to talk about a 25-year difference between Black and white residents, but artists do, and artists will help communities come up with solutions to long-term problems like that.
Wow, that is such amazing work. And what I hear from that, particularly in such a dark year, is that you all are bringing some light to the community and the services and opportunities that you're providing. I want to actually ask all of you, as we talk about actually this intersection of 2 pandemics that Black people are experiencing. Yes, COVID-19, but racism is also still a pandemic. What do you think that some of the long-term effects of this pandemic will be in terms of equity and opportunity? And also, what is each of your organizations' plan to hopefully address this?
So I'll start. I think one of the things is, one of the long-term implications is academic regression. And our organization really is placing an emphasis on, number one, ensuring that, we continue to address, educational deficiencies or where students may have fallen off during this pandemic, getting them the extra support that they need, ramping up our teams to meet them where they are and to provide, again, additional support. We also think that there are going to be long-term implications around mental health and behavioral health. And so one of the things that we're doing in our community is really focusing strategically on hiring individuals who look like the community to come in and break down those stigmas around mental health and behavioral health, and us being able to provide those services within our facility. As I mentioned earlier, we are a wraparound type of program where we, address all of the barriers to success. And this is going to be a big barrier, I think, in the future. We are in the process of building a new facility, and one of the focuses in that new facility is a health and wellness wing, so we can address some of those long-term implications of this pandemic. We have seen some, economic gaps grow in our community. Asali mentioned just kind of utilizing the community, definitely deploying some of our, what we call community natural helpers, to go out there to find out what people are dealing with and to bring those issues back to our organization so that we can address firsthand what the individuals in our community need. We're not coming up with a long-term strategy for what we think they need. We are asking them to inform the process, and we will be making a strategic effort to go out there and raise those funds to support exactly what children and families need, whether that's, additional academic support, housing, employment opportunities, training opportunities that will be housed in our facility, in the community, connecting with partners, collaborating more so that we can give our community, the best of what they deserve, leveraging the strengths of other organizations and uplifting the weaknesses of some of the organizations in our community so we can all band together for really a long-term successes and really elevating our community and really helping them sort of recover from this pandemic and pandemics that they've long suffered from.
It's amazing. Robert, we'd love to hear from you on this.
Yeah, absolutely, Alencia. The pandemic exposed existing inequalities across the board, and the criminal justice system, was no different. What it did do, it brought into plain sight what communities have been saying for a long time, which is that prisons don't make us safe, right? Incarcerating people don't make us safe. And then they started to listen when the pandemic hit. And they started to release people, which is something we've been asking for a very long time, that there are large numbers of people in prisons that should have never been there. And then they wanted to listen during the pandemic. So in some ways, it exposed the racial inequalities. In other ways, it opened up a moment of listening. And now it's up to us in the criminal justice advocacy community to continue to move the ball and elevate public health solutions for public health problems in this moment. For a long time, these cries have been ignored, as I mentioned, cries for recovery, support, real investment were dismissed, and in place, they put in mass surveillance and mass supervision and mass incarceration. So now's the time to advance these issues, the issues we know that work, people-to-people solutions, as I mentioned before. We need to continue to advocate for stability, for employment opportunity, for wellness for people in the system. We have to just increase our advocacy, our effort, our strength. And get real change for our folks on the ground. And that's what Reform is committed to doing, especially under my leadership. And I've also seen an increase of activity around public health solutions in the criminal justice space, which I'm excited about.
Amazing. Uzo.
So, I think when it comes to this idea of the twin pandemics, I want to just go back to the root of these two things. And, I was saying that my background is in public health, have written a little bit about some epidemics. And I think it's really interesting when people compare racism to a virus or to an outbreak of disease or an epidemic, because one, that is the virus, the COVID-19 that we're seeing right now, it's a virus, right? It's a natural phenomenon. Its purpose is it exists to replicate itself inside people and continue to do that over and over and over again. Whereas racism that we see it is a man-made or a human-made construction. It is something that was built purposefully to subjugate a certain set of people in the support of an economic system. That's what racism is. And I say that just so that we can name the problem, so that we understand how we can dismantle the problem. If you confuse issues, if you confuse the start, then then you won't be able to come up with a solution. So people want you to think that racism is a natural phenomenon, that it has always been with us, that it will always be with us. And I think, yes, bias is there, prejudice is there, but racism as a construct is something that we've put together, again, in support of a particular system of extraction. So all of the fights that we have about whether we're saying everyone is racist, racism has always been with us, or, against things like critical race theory, et cetera, are all about confusing everyone so that we don't know what it is that we're attacking or that we're fighting, that we can, as humans, come together to dismantle. And if we do work at it together, that is everyone involved, people who have benefited from systems of racism and those who have been affected adversely by those systems, again, there are certain parts of those populations that will have to do more work than others. And it's not an easy task in any way, shape, or form, but it is something that we can do, provided everybody is willing to name the problem and then get on the same page to deal with the problem. So, that's just to say that, I think that there is hope. I don't think that we're necessarily in the best of spots right now, because I think people are still really trying to confuse the issue. And I really think that the more that all of us who are doing this work can educate people and really drive home this idea that there's a need to be very clear about the terms and a need to be very active in making sure people understand those terms. Again, it goes back to education at the root. That's when we'll start seeing, in this present iteration of the confusion that people are trying to generate, progress. Until then, we're going to have a lot of confusion.
Thank you. And Asali, to wrap this question up about the long-term effects of this pandemic and what your organization is doing, we'd love to hear from you.
Thank you. I appreciate the question, particularly because I feel like it kind of captures the beauty of what the Warner Brothers Blavatnik Family Social Justice Fund is trying to achieve. First of all, creating a systemic change within your own organization, right? And then putting those efforts out there into the world and encouraging other organizations to do the same, being an example, right? And a model for how it's actually done. And like Dr. Uzo mentioned, like all of our panelists mentioned, this is about undesign, right? It's not a virus, it's not a natural selection, it's not the way that things have to be. If we put as much intentionality and resources, right, into making these changes, then it will happen. Like we're very industrious, creative, determined in all kinds of things, right? And so if we make a commitment, as society, as a group of people in society, with some higher and better ideals about how things could and should be equitable, then we can create those changes. And so for our part, here in New Orleans, we're taking two, really three kind of long-term approaches. One is around our right to stay and return policy, which is working to end displacement. We are facing aggressive gentrification and displacement in New Orleans Black neighborhoods. We just recently, we are currently embroiled in a controversy around our city hall attempting to move into Treme, which is the oldest Black neighborhood in the country, where Black people were first able to buy their own plots of land and create their own families and businesses and industry. A neighborhood impacted by, all kinds of decades of local, state, and federal intervention. And now they're trying to really end the neighborhood, by putting the seat of government in the city there. And so, with our policy, we're fighting that. We're really in the undesign, critically looking at the design, right? Putting results-based accountability measures, using a racial equity framework, an environmental equity framework, with results-based accountability measures, right? You have to be able to measure these things, and you have to look at the entire history. We're a 300-year-old city, still, guided by laws that were created to enslave us. That could never work for our benefit. So that has to be dismantled. The other thing is, the access to wealth, the access to capital, the ability to recover generational wealth that has been not just missed out on, but literally stolen, right? And so we're creating a community investment trust that allows residents to invest in real estate developments in their community with a threshold of as little as $10 a month. You don't have to have 50,000, 100,000, in order to be able to invest and see a return on what happens in your community. And so those are some of the, kind of systemic things that we're working on. To result in real difference in outcomes, in addition to the housing that we provide for artists in our neighborhood.
Now, I would love for each of you to address our viewers and those of us listening directly. What is the easiest way for them to get involved with your organization specifically, or some similar organizations that you work with to advance the work that you were doing? So, Asali, we'll start with you, and then we'll go backwards.
All right. Well, you can always, see us digitally at www.ashenola.org. Come to our social media platforms. Our Instagram is Ashé_CAC. Facebook is Ashé.CAC to, see what we do. We are opening back to the public soon in August. And so, if you are in New Orleans, come and see us. If you're visiting New Orleans, come and see us and, you know, just get involved with the programming, and not just, an organization, not just Ashé, but organizations like us, like the organizations our panelists lead and represent all over the country, really all over the world, are serving individuals, are serving communities, and need your hands, need your time, need your resources to make this equity thing, to make this community, nation, global revolution of equity happen.
That's great. Uzo, what about your organization?
I love what Asali just said about it's not just coming, it's also volunteering and being involved and helping to build community. So for us at the Africa Center, one of the ways, again, just because of the pandemic, that you can come and get involved is, one, just follow us online at the Africa Center on all of the digital platforms, Instagram, Twitter, whatnot, so we can build that online community in anticipation of opening our doors again. We actually have a portion that's open right now. So if you're in New York City and you're interested in learning more about African food by eating African food, you can come up and visit Teranga at the Africa Center for a sense of community and sustenance. Otherwise, we're hoping to either have our doors open, possibly as early as October, if not then February of 2022. Again, inviting everyone to come through and participate in the building of an institution that is really about telling our stories and sharing different new innovative stories about who we are as Africans and diaspora folks. And we really welcome your participation and your support.
Tina, you're up next.
Similarly, just like Asali and Dr. Uzo said, you can volunteer with our organization. We always say, it's not always about money, it's time, talent, or treasures. You can visit us at www.overtownyouth.org, as well as follow us on all of the social media platforms at OYC Miami. And if you're ever in Miami, Overtown is one of the oldest historically Black communities. For those visiting Miami, we would love to have you visit our locations where we provide services to both youth and families.
Thank you. Last but certainly not least, Robert.
Well, Alencia, this is an exciting time to engage in criminal justice reform in this country. There are more organizations working on this issue than ever before. At the national level, you have groups like Center for Policing Equity, Alliance for Safety and Justice, Color Change, Crime Survivors for Safety and Justice, which are a group of crime victims that don't want tough on crime policies in their name and want to change to more progressive policies and solutions. So that there are a lot of organizations out there at the national level. There are also a growing number of organizations at the local and state level for people to get involved in. Regarding probation and parole, I invite your viewers to join Reform and be a reformer. Sign up on our list, go to reformalliance.com, and they can hear about actions they can take to get involved. Text reform to 81411 and be a member. There they'll be engaged with a series of activities on how to contact their local and state legislator and their federal legislator around reforms that we're working on in their state. Also help us shift the narrative. There are a lot of stories out there. I shared one earlier of a 76-year-old grandmother who was just sent back to jail and on her way to prison, unfortunately. But that's just one of millions of stories that are out there. And so we want to uplift those stories and engage in real change so people can experience not just how to elevate these issues in this moment, but how to make real results.
Thank you. Thank you all so much. This has been a truly amazing conversation. Different thoughts and perspectives, all centered around how we achieve real justice for our communities. So Uzo, Asali, Robert, Tina, on behalf of the Warner Music Group and Blavatnik Family Foundation Social Justice Fund Board, I want to just thank you so much for joining us for this conversation of change. And we are so honored to be partnering with you and supporting you in all of your exceptional organizations. And thank you to everyone who is watching. We hope that you will continue to check out all of the amazing work coming out from all of these incredible organizations. Yes, follow them on social media, familiarize yourself with their websites, but most importantly, please, 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 get involved with your time and your resources wherever you can. Thank you so much for watching.